All right, I think we're ready for your presentation, Deb. Do you want to have us play through the slides? Or
If you've got it up already, why don't we just stick with that so as not to create any additional opportunities for issues?
sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, improvise and overcame.
Okay, so we can launch into it. Do you want to go to the, okay, got it. So it's in it's on the PDF, looks like,
Yeah.
huh? Okay, that can work. So apologies that I can't be with you all this evening. I'll keep my germs to myself. We've got a lot to cover, and special guest, the city manager is there, and I'm assuming Paul is there too, because he's going to help out with some of the transportation discussion too.
Paul, I'm here.
Okay, great. So we're basically going to do a recap of each system and provide new information for the water system, which I will let the city manager discuss. And then kind of bring it all together in the total bill comparison under the different options. So let's go to the next slide. So the water rate update, a lot hinges upon the changes to the capital improvement plan and the strategy that is emerging. There have been some changes to the anticipated timing and costs associated with the plant, and there have been projects removed from the short-term CIP to accommodate additional funding for the plant. And those projects include some of the seismic improvements, both at the reservoirs and the cast iron pipe replacement or resilience, I guess. And then one of the options has potential for operating cost reductions in the form of some staffing cost reductions. So we can talk more about that. The next slide.
A couple of questions. So one, the project's removed. I assume, is that the city council that decides that? Is that how that works?
Will, do you want to take that?
So when we were looking at this, knowing that rate review committee had an interest in us further restraining the escalation of the rate, we went back through and looked at all of the things that we could possibly reduce or remove. And therefore, two areas where, and I'm not saying in an ideal world, these are good ideas. They're cost-effective ideas. One would be to take away seismic improvement in the reservoirs, hoping to do it later, who knows when. And the other was reduce the amount of money for cast iron pipe resilience, which is triggered every time we find a pipe that's rubbish. So basically that's turning what was a $300,000 line item down to a $100,000 line item, and crossing our fingers and hoping that we don't find too much of that type of pipe when we're doing our work. In other words, it's a bit of a Hail Mary shot on that one, okay? But it does reduce the rate model.
So are these then a done deal, or does the city council still need to vote on it?
Well, the whole package will ultimately end up with the city council.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, we were asked to take the scalpel and go back and look, and we did.
Right. Okay. Good.
Who asked that? My understanding is that the rate review committee were interested in restraining the growth of rates to about 4%. I mean, that's what I've been hearing, right?
Yeah, we were trying to keep the rates in line to what it's been in the past.
Okay.
And so unable to do that, we had to go back and do a few cost cutting measures in order to keep it in line to what it's been in the past, without having to do larger than normal increases on the rates.
And there's a through line from that position to this.
Okay.
I thought for water, our concern was we didn't have a clear plan laying out the capital and what the plan would be. So it was very difficult to get a rate set up because Deb didn't know what to plan for because the decisions hadn't been made as far as what the capital expenditures were gonna be. It was a chicken and egg situation. So we escalated that of we want the city engineer to go up and say, this is what I'm gonna do, here's a plan. May fall apart, but this is our plan, and from that, we can go off and look at a break. Otherwise, poor Deb was trying to, throw a ball at him about, you're gonna spend some money, you're not. There was no, I don't recall us saying, cut everything as much as you go through the bone, so it says with the line. I don't remember that specifically.
And that's not specifically what we did, but I mean, the rate that we had proposed originally back in October for water was, I think, around 5 or 6%. And I think the general committee's opinion on that was that that was much higher than what we've had in the past. And without a real plan on anything, that was sort of unacceptable. And so that's why we've reworked a few things. And we have multiple options for each of the system on different rate increases.
And we also know a lot more than we did when the price on the water plant
Exactly.
exploded.
Exactly.
And we got some more information about that, and it's not good.
Just going forward, and correct me. We want to be able to have the money in place so we can effectively run our systems, our utilities. Not run through their bones, but have effective cost measures and funds available to go up and run up these systems so we can continue the performance of the service the city provides to the community. So if there's things that we need that, we want to have that dialogue of we need to figure out how to pay for that or put that increase in.
Yes,
Okay,
but it's also a balance between keeping the water bills reasonable
yes,
and giving reasonable increases and being able to fulfill what the city needs to do capital project wise.
Okay, so the next slide then shows. Oh, yeah, so did you want to explain this, Will?
Mhm.
About the current strategy around the plant in
Certainly.
more detail?
First, I'll give a minuscule degree of history. So over the last several years, we were told 21.5, 21.5, 21.5, 21.5. We asked time and time again, is this the right number? We negotiated with the federal government. We lined up a WIFIA loan. We spent hundreds of staff hours jumping through hoops to build a package to be 21.5, 50% of which would be paid for by an EPA WIFIA loan, but not a dollar more. We get to 30% engineering design. They come back and tell us that a plant that only has 2/3 of the capacity of what we really need now would cost $24 or $25 million. And the plant that we had originally envisaged would cost over $40 million. And that's impossible. It's impossible right now because that WIFIA loan doesn't cover that. And that's where half of the revenue was coming from. So I made the executive decision to pull the plug on that to stop throwing away any further ratepayers' money. After the council were offered my resignation and they chose not to accept it, believing that it was not my fault, we then moved on. The next step we did was discover what are we really looking at. For a scaled down plant, we are looking at something between $24 and $25 million, which we cannot afford right now. We need to do some debt reduction work before we can build the plant, but we still need to have an accumulator in the rates model to have a chance to build a plant after debt reduction is complete. That means that we're now looking at 7 to 8 years out. We have to band-aid the plant we currently have until that time. Recently, I and the councillors went on a tour of the water plant to ask, how much more juice can you squeeze out of the existing plant if we did some more work in place? The answer, 500,000 gallons a day maximum with the equipment that is on site. Adjacent land cannot support more ponds. It's not viable based upon where that historic plant was placed. So what is the strategy today? The strategy today is 7 to 8 years out after we have retired all of our other debts, except for the debt associated with the bypass, because that's a very long-term debt. But when all the other debt is retired and the city can afford to look at taking on more debt, then we will build half of what we need. That means we will continue to band-aid the 70-year-old plant forward in time, even after that moment. Because what we're going to be able to build in 7 or 8 years is still not going to be the full meal deal. It means we will have to operate from 2 locations. It will work, but it's not the whole deal. Now, am I going to sit on my laurels, or am I going to chase federal grants to try to make that plant expansion be a one-time deal and get all that we need then, now north of 40 million? Yes, I will. And I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to be the same manager in those days as I am now, and that's what we're going to try to do. If it doesn't work and we don't get the funding from the federal government through a grant, and if we try for a general obligation bond and that also fails, we try all the things we can try, then 7 to 8 years from now, when the wastewater debt is retired, the communications tower debt is retired, we will then build half of the capacity that we need for the future. And then someone who comes after me will have to build the other half of that capacity to finally take that old plant offline, at which point it will be 85 years old. Now, I've spoken to the men that run the plant. They can continue to keep the plant running. They can band-aid it. They can replace actuators and hydraulics. They'll keep it going. So we have the capacity we need. It's not an ideal scenario, but given the ballooning prices of building these things, it's all I can think to do. What's the alternative? We don't build any new capacity in the system, and round about 2032, 2033, you will be having hosepipe bans and other measures will have to be taken in the summertime based upon our 200 units per year escalating growth of what's being constructed in town. And that's if a big factory doesn't move into the mill site and start drawing down water heavily. That's a conservative estimate. Those hosepipe bans could be coming soon. So that's what we've got, folks. The model as it currently stands has a small plant, but an extensible plant envisaged 7 to 8 years out. Half of what we need. And then we would have to run in parallel the old plant and this half solution. But I'm going to try to make it the whole deal solution. But even to get there, we have to retire more of our debt because we need to be able to take on more debt service at some point in the future.
So, a question. So one of the assumptions you mentioned was no new factory on the old mill side. Any other major assumptions that you built into being able to handle the future capacity for the next 7 years?
So we've correlated the last 3 years of construction. Now it's one of these good bad things, construction slowing down. So we've had 180, 190, 200 homes in the last 3 years that are drawing down on our water supply. We're projecting over the next few years a lot less. The Polish Homes development is talking 50 or 60 units, and there'll be a small amount of infill. Maybe 100 is what we're thinking. But no, we don't know what's coming at the mill site, because right now, the mill site developer is looking for a very high dollar amount per square foot, and we don't know what will happen with that. So we're really not certain what will happen at the mill site, but we do know that we can't predict it. The plans that we have would move closer in time if a major factory went in.
Are we ready to move on, or since I can't see you all, you'll just have to tell me when you're ready for the next.
Yeah, I think you can go on.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is what the revised plan looks like in blue, the blue bars. As you can see, as Will said, the short-term red bars were eliminated. That was the new plant in the original estimate before it hit 40 million. And then, so there is still capital improvement expenditures in the years leading up to the plant, that placeholder in 2032. And that is to do the important, state mandated projects for HB 2001 of upsizing lines and doing various other required capital maintenance and improvement projects. The total over the planning period here is about $42 million, which includes that 24 million plant as we've projected it out in 2032, which includes inflation, expected inflation, which fingers crossed will have returned to more historical kind of 3%, 2 to 3% kind of ranges per year. Next slide.
Actually, can we hold on that?
I'll go back.
So the blue is the new plan of funds needed to be collected.
Half a plan,
By half.
some capacity, which would have to be. That represents, in today dollars, a smaller plant than we originally wanted to build, but it would give us enough capacity to not have issues. But it's not the whole deal that we need. There's more work to be done. We need to raise more than that, whether it's then or 10 years after then with the old plan still running.
So that's basically the 40 million divided by 2, scaled up for inflation over 7 years, more or less.
Approximately, it's Consor, well, they wouldn't give me a hard number on where we would be then. They said it was going to be in the region of, 23, $24 million, assuming inflation stays back at its normal growth rate. But understand, that blue bar is not enough water capacity to shut down the old plant.
And so what I don't understand is in 2024, you got 5,000. But then it goes all funny, and then in 2028, it's super low. And then you got an insane spike in 2032.
Yeah. So there are stupid unfunded state mandates that are sticking to us. And a lot of those capital projects in that first section are HB 2001 water line upgrades, which we have no way to say no to. They're forcing us to upgrade those water lines, millions and millions of dollars. We looked at it from all different directions. If there was any way of getting out of doing it, and there's no way of getting out of doing it. So in other words, instead of saying this apartment complex cannot be high-rised any further because the water pressure doesn't support it, the state's saying, you're going to make these areas have to support that water pressure.
My question is, I don't know how you do that big bar. And would it be better to have a little more upfront before this 2032 huge cost that you need to cover?
Actually, no, because if we're really smart, like she is. We'll keep doing CDs and other revenue raising instruments that she's already started to raise some interest. So if we do an accumulator for longer, which is her idea, then we actually will be in a better place with $500,000 here, $500,000 there, raised towards the final amount. What I would love to do, which I'm not allowed to, is to spread out the HB 2001 work.
But with a little extra. Help you. In other words, this bare bones thing, I don't know how that got articulated, and that's fine. Is it beneficial to the city if I've got to do this mandated work and I've got to do this plan? We need a small increment increase, that would be helpful.
Yes,
But these are the capital improvements that you're projecting, not necessarily. It's different than the cash that you're building up over time,
Yeah, and we'll get to that in the next slides.
which gets to, I think, Ron's comment. I mean, with the 4.5% rate that's been recommended here, and we'll go through that. But you're building up cash reserves over time to ultimately help to pay for that.
Both of the options that we're presenting for this will get us to the correct amount of projects that we need to do. It's just different ways that we're going to accomplish it, if that makes sense. Derek, Doug, did you have a question?
I did,
Sure.
yeah. So the question I had was, being on this committee just for this first year, the regulatory requirements that are really driving much of the work that we're doing over the next 4 fiscal years, how often do those sorts of regulations come up over time? And, I know that there's not a way to necessarily account for that because you can't foresee what the Oregon legislature is going to do to require local municipalities to make these improvements. But was that really a one-off thing that required us to come up to code with this, or is this kind of an ongoing process where the legislator every 5 to 10 years proposes new requirements that require us to get up to code that will require additional funding that isn't necessarily foreseen with this forecast?
According to this is Paul. I'm one of the staff at the Public Works Engineer. According to my recollection, the HB 2001, we need to finish it up in about 8 or 9 years time. That was information a year ago or so I might be off by a year or two. So it's somewhere safe to say between 5 and 10 years. Certainly less than 10 years, we have to finish it. On that one, they are according to the state legislature requirements. But if you want the exact number of years and number of months, I can get it to you.
so Paul, actually that wasn't the question. The question was, how often does the state do something like HB 2001? Is this a sort of pattern that happens a lot, or?
My apology for answering the wrong question here. This kind of things is really hard to predict what the legislature will do because we are kind of like hit by this HB 2001 that boom, and then there's a deadline that we have to follow, and so there's no way out of it, and there's no fiscal or financial support. It's pretty much on us. It's unfunded mandate, and so based on the pleasure of the state, I guess. So if there will be another one coming, honestly, I do not know. And
But aren't there also, sorry, Paul, it seemed like some of the seismic work is also requirements. And I don't know if that's state, federal. There's always water quality regulations coming down the pike. And that all gets to the extent that whenever you do your master plan updates, part of that is looking at the landscape of potential regulations coming up at the federal and state levels, right?
That's absolutely true, Deb. And what I can say in my short time as a city manager, because I used to be a librarian and have to deal with these sorts of things. In my short time, I've already seen 2 waves of these things, one being the covering the reservoirs mandate, which provided no money for that. And then the second one being the HB 2001. Oh, thank you. And there's actually, that's 3 in 2 years. The lead and copper rule.
Yes, right.
Fortunately, we were already very compliant with that, but there's 3 in 2 years. So who knows what is just around the corner.
So I think there always are. It seems like every time I look at a master plan, it's like, and on the regulatory horizon, here's what's coming next. And that gets compounded with the need to do the pipe replacements, which historically as an industry, we have not been keeping pace with. So I think there's just continues to be a backlog of infrastructure investment needs. And then there's the forward looking, and then there's the plant, which is kind of a capacity and deferred replacement issue too. So never a shortage. Derek, did you have anything else? Did that help, or do you have any
Yeah,
other
no,
follow-up?
that helped. I was really just talking more about the cyclicality of when these sorts of mandates would come down. So based upon what I'm hearing um, from Will, it sounds like, we obviously can't forecast or predict what the Oregon legislator what they're going to hand down to the various municipalities, but there's probably some costs that will come down at some point in the back half of this forecast that we just really don't have any purview or any sort of sense of what that would probably look like. Which that as I'm thinking through this, we're kind of going as bare bones as possible, and with that, and I think we might put ourselves into potentially even more dire straits if we try to drive the rate at a low sustainable. We'll just be back to the same thing in 2 years, asking for higher rate increases. That's kind of just how I'm processing that as we're talking through this.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, this was, as was pointed out, I think by a couple of you, so this chart shows now the red is the revised plan. That's the actual planned capital expenditures, which, as we've seen, it's well, first of all, the scale is dwarfed because of the anticipated plant expenditure in 2032. But those over the next few years, that's really focused on the HB 2001 improvements and some other improvements that have been identified. The blue line, which is based on a 4.5% per year rate increase assumption, covers some of those costs, dipping into reserves initially. Then, as was mentioned, there's the potential, should there not be anything additional from the state or other emergency repairs, replacements that are needed, an opportunity perhaps then to build back up the reserves that we've utilized to fund the initial improvements in order to have some additional cash on hand for that 2032 investment. So, and then if you go to the next slide, that shows what the components of the annual capital improvement expenditures are anticipated to come from. There is in SDC, so in the short term, the SDC funding, the rate funding, with some grants initially sprinkled in, and the second little purple box in 2026 is actually the CD earnings that Will was referring to earlier. Then it's kind of, rates and SDCs until we get to the big expenditure in 2032, which has been noted that even with the 4.5% increase, that's not going to cover that entire expenditure. So either some form of debt funding or other external funding would need to come to play in order to make that investment feasible at a 4.5% rate increase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it include doing the necessary replacements to keep the older plants still running refurbished?
Will, I'm gonna have to have you answer that.
Yes, the amount of capital necessary on an annual basis to keep the plant running isn't on these scales. It's just very labor intensive. The biggest problem, as the operations staff have explained it to me, is that the primary feed pipes cannot be upsized. They can do more with filters, but there's a hard limit.
Second question. 2028, 2029, a very, very lean capital expenditure. Have we had a year like that where we've been able to run that light with that small of a capital expenditure for a water system?
I don't know the answer. One more time. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
My
But
concern is that, so from a statistical, from just a trend perspective, that looks like an anomaly. It looks like a hope. Not versus what, I apologize if I interrupted.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to clarify that there is a difference between the capital project and maintenance project.
That's-
Because we'll obviously still have a large maintenance budget. This is just for the new capital projects, which are different than operational maintenance, if that makes sense.
But the capital still includes government mandates. Yes.
Which is mainly in 24 through 27. That what most of that is. So that's why this creates kind of a distortion. And it gets back to the risk that Derek brought up earlier, that this assumes no new government requirements. And obviously you don't know what those things would be. But based upon the past history, it sounds like those will probably hit. And maybe in that 28 through 31 time frame.
If you see something that will work, we're gonna learn that and then talk. So there is one thing you can do. If a new mandate comes out and we simply don't have the resources, we can seek a waiver from the state. Traditionally, the state has been willing to give us 4- and 5-year waivers till we can have a recovered position. So that might get us out of that.
Okay, on the next slide, you all have been raising really excellent points about uncertainties and risks. And this slide, I just wanted to highlight that red new line that has now been inserted, and that's that $4 million water treatment plant contingency of 25%. If the last several months has taught us anything, it's these things are uncertain and costs can increase really rapidly. As has been pointed out, there's lean years there that are anticipated, and what if something gets identified as needing to be funded? So what we've done here is to insert an additional contingency factor into the planning reserve so that we can hedge some of that risk. And if you go to the next slide, I think you'll see. So the reserves or the fund balance that's on hand today, which is in the gray line, which in 2024 it's about up just about $10 million. That, as we saw from the higher than projected the capital expenditures currently exceeding over the next few years the cash revenue available, that you need to draw down those reserves initially. But what this is showing is that the 4.5% is designed to basically hold that reserve flat or let it decline a little bit, but rather than planning for the dash line, which is what we had previously been saying you could draw down reserves to that point. We're saying, no, let's lift that minimum reserve so that we have some extra cushion in this plan should the costs exceed what we're projecting, mostly and the capital costs, and whether that be the plant or something else that's identified. So there is an additional $4 million of contingency included in this 4.5% plan. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns that were raised. But yeah, and so any questions on that? Okay, so the next
Yeah,
there,
back-
oh yeah, sorry.
Question, so if the rate of the increase was, let's say 0.5% higher, 5 versus 4.5, do you know how much more reserves you would have by FY 33?
Well, I'm sitting here at my computer, so I could probably, let me just plug in 5% into my model here and go to my, you want to go back one slide to see what that reserve table said. Or sorry, go back, yeah, go right there. So that is saying the projected reserve was 9.7, that blue line at the bottom. So the items above were kind of what that target was, and that's showing that we would hit the projected to hit about the 9.7. Let me just find that table here in my spreadsheet. I've plugged in a 5% per year rate increase, and why didn't that update that? Let me look one other place here. I thought I could do this quickly. Sorry, one sec.
I also do medieval war games.
I just said Jack Bites.
Actually, the Tonic Orders, they're just other Baltic factions. It's an area I'm interested in.
What miniature?
Hmm?
Use the miniature?
Yeah, 15mm.
Yeah,
So-
15 mm, yeah,
That's my list.
I'm one of those people.
yeah, same,
Oh, I didn't know that.
not for that era,
Oh, what period? was it?
Civil War,
Fine.
American.
What rules?
Oh, my own rules.
See, we can set up a little cubicle with models.
That's
Yeah.
really, we should
A little
talk.
army man.
We should, you and I should talk.
Okay, it looks like that number would be about 14.
Wow, so pretty.
If across all funds. Let's see, did I include, I don't think I included the SDC, but actually the SDC is not, yeah, let me just double check that. So I think it's 14. I'm going to change the rate increase back to 4.5%. Check that same place I was just looking. Now, remember, this is over, so that's like an 8-year period. And it's so looks like a slightly, so looks like an additional 2 million. This other number that I have in here that I was just looking at is slightly higher than that 9.7. So I'm mixing some, not comparing apples to apples, but I think it looks like an additional 2 million would be added to the reserve under that a 5% rate increase.
Okay, so an extra 0.5% would yield about 2 million more reserves over the time period. Over the 8 years.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. And I can verify that too by when I go back to the presentation that I did in September did look at exactly that question. So I'll double check it against that too while we're having some of the discussion tonight.
Yeah, thank you. My follow-up question is that extra meaningful to Katie and Will?
I didn't quite hear that question.
The question was, would it be meaningful? And yes, it would mitigate against the unknown, which is always good.
Will, could you talk about how you might balance that against what we were talking about earlier, that is price increases for some of our forest citizens? Need versus want.
Right. Right. I mean, that's a good counterpoint. The fact of the matter is, however, that we do intend to get one of the line items off of the bill entirely in 3 years. So, Katie, do you know what the current charge rate is on the communication fee?
I believe it's $2.67 for a single family home per month.
So, because of what we've already started doing with debt reduction, we are feeling really confident in the 3-year model that that's coming off. So that would be a counterpoint to however many cents the raise would be if we go another 0.5%. That's my answer. I mean, I'm working on this other thing, which council wants me to, and we're working on it hard. We've been looking for other revenue sources, and we have got them. Some of it's already in the bank, thanks to the school resource officer deal. There are other revenue sources coming online that we're going to use for debt reduction to make the machine leaner. But if it's the will of the people, I'm not going to say no to some more buffer in the system.
Are you ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, let's advance then to, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay, so keep going. Okay, so Will, I don't think you talked about the staffing scenario, the reduced staffing scenario. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that other than we developed a scenario that was a lower rate increase, about 3.9%, but it involves reducing staffing costs by 190,000 a year.
And I apologize, maybe I got off on the wrong foot at the beginning of the meeting. I thought that we were being asked to do a hard cap of 4% no matter what, which meant, you know, we came and looked at 2 models here. One model involved laying off 3 people and spreading the work to others, which would be painful, and it obviously would not be as efficient as having. We're not planning on any staffing increases, by the way. There are no staffing increases planned for the city staff at any time through this period. If my good friends in ASME are listening right now, they should realize that this is the case. But this would be losing 3 people.
What would the numbers look like if your contingency for the treatment plant at 4 million was half that? In terms of maybe keeping the 190,000 a year in staff. We looked at 20% contingency instead of 25. At 4.5%.
And to be honest with me, I don't think I could answer that on the spot right now without running the numbers back through the model again. We have to recalibrate it. Obviously, it would make a change, but I couldn't give a specific answer. We did identify, because we built 2 separate models for tonight, and one of the models was running at this rate, the other model was not. So,
What's the benefit of doing that? There's a cost and a risk of that. You talk through.
Sure, I had this, through this whole process, we haven't heard that we're labor heavy. We've got more bodies than we need, we need more capital projects, so retaining staff seems like a priority. And if we could retain that staff, get it to the 3.9% by recognizing a 20% contingency instead of 25, 40% of the current reserve.
So I just ran those numbers. I plugged in what I did was I plugged in a 4% rate increase, which is roughly the same as the 3.9, close. And then I reduced the additional contingency in half to 2 million. And those, it looks the same as this chart you're looking at, it's just lower, right? So the minimum and the gray bar, the dashed and the gray bar meet at the end. They're just a couple million lower.
I think that's a much bigger decrease in the contingency though, than what there was then, like you were saying, lower from 25% to 20%.
Correct, and leave the model at 4.5.
From 4 to 2.
Yeah, so leave the model at 4.5, but reduce the contingency 20% instead of 25. What do you save over 8 years, and is it enough to fund 3 positions? And
Well,
get a good rate of 4 essentially. Keeping the bodies and not cutting.
the 4.5 does not assume, I just want to make sure we're clear that that under the 4.5% rate increase, there is no assumed reduction in staffing. We've got the $4 million
No, I'm following.
contingency. Okay, it's to get down to a 3.9% rate increase that there was the reduction in staffing assumed, but that contingency was set still at 4 million. What I thought where you were going was, could we get to a 4% rate increase, not by reducing staff, but instead by cutting that additional contingency reserve? And the answer is yes.
And yet another one, but yes, I'm following you on both of those fronts.
So that would be a third model. The question then would be, what's our bottom funding reserve at the very bottom of the trough? That's what I'm concerned about now, not having looked at that model. I don't suppose, Deb, there's any way you could work that up during this meeting. It's a hell of a big ask. I'm sorry if that's too much to ask.
Oh, I just did, I think. I
Okay.
think I've got that. Well, I mean,
Others can ask questions. No, I didn't.
I think though what you said, Deb, was that in order for all that to work, i.e. 4% rate increase, keep the heads.
Yep.
What would you have to reduce the contingency down to? I think you said you'd have to reduce it down to maybe 2 million instead of 4.
Yeah, so the line, the gray line and the dash line, which now meet at about that, what is that, 9 something? It's hard to, yeah, it's somewhere in between the 8, yeah, around 9 million. That would fall below the 8 million line to be, basically $2 million less.
Pretty big reduction in the contingency.
Life is full of risk.
Yeah.
But that impacts the contingency funds. So the impact of that is.
The impact of that is less guard against another cost overrun and the unknown. The unknown being another wackadoodle thing out of Salem.
So the counterpart. Wackadoodle out of Salem is not gonna stop. Unknown cost of construction, not gonna stop. It's a known constant of. Yeah. We're going to have an aging plant continue further, which requires staffing, because it's gonna be maintenance as far as expense. So you're gonna need the people to go off and run there. So there's the fourth model, that is a 5.0 rate increase. Right, that we ran through. That's how we initially talked about. Keep the 4 million as for buffer and go to 5 and go up, and just because we're hoping 2028, 2029 is not going to have something crazy that's going to impact us, and we don't know because we have nothing planned. Yep. And the likelihood of something is higher than that. Seems like 5 is the right thing to do with the big cost.
Yeah, I think maybe I was confused also, because when we ran the 5 before in October, my impression was that was too high of a rate, and that's why we brought back these 2 lower models that had One that the 3.9 is very close to what we've done in the past historically, and that's what we were trying to present the committee with, was something similar to what we've done in the past. And then the 4.5 was giving us a little bit more of a cushion. But I was under the impression the 5% was out of the realm of possibility.
And that's fair for dialogue. I think Dirk Worf had the brilliant suggestion that we were trying to hit something and we didn't know. And that's why we came back and said, what is the, what are the real expenditures? What's going on? And we still want to throw money at something at a target we didn't know where it was going. We were looking for more of a concrete plan. That's why I kept on saying I wanted engineering to come up with a guess at the expenditures and what the plan's going to be, so we can go on and we can say, part of that plan, we want to go and hit that. It was other, we're against a 5. We just want to know what the plan was. I think the plan at 4.5 has an inherent risk. That's why I was asking the questions. 4.5 has a inherent risk of 2028, 2029 being too narrow. Too lean. I mean, we're hoping. That's not how you run. That's not how you should run a city, by hoping. The smart thing to do is, based upon the numbers, based upon that, a 5.0 makes sense. It's an increase, and that's not desirable. But on the flip side of it, we've got a large looming cost that we can justify and say, we've got a huge expenditure coming up. We've got to have a water plant. Half of a water plant is what we're hoping for. We're trying for a full one. This makes sense. What initially was, we had so many unknowns, and we got hands up in the air, and that we can't throw money. That's what we were running to, and that's what we're trying to ask for. That's why I tried to articulate a couple of times that we just wanted the plan, so that Deb can take the plan that she provided and go off and say, okay, cool, this would make sense.
That's rational. Absolutely. So we have more concreteness based on our inflated number. This is half the capacity we need. We have to try to get a bricks grant. We have to, if that doesn't work, we have to try for a general obligation bond to try to do the plan in one swoop if the voters vote yes. And if not, we're going to be doing it again in 10 years after that.
I want to thank you, Will, also for what I consider maybe the most transparent plan that I've heard today. I think you laid it out very well. And some of the things we were uncertain about, whether it works or not, I think any plan had a chance to fail or succeed. That one just seems like you at least have some concrete milestones and a plan. The other thing I would add is I'm looking back at prior presentation documents, and rates have been steadily going up. There was a large jump to kind of kickstart things 10 years ago, 11, and then it's been 3.5% or 4% continuously. I have to imagine somewhere built in those rate increases through prior committees, there was expectation of this water plant. Are we saying that the first time the water plant came online in terms of we need additional dollars on top of base funding was this current one we're talking about?
Last year.
The last year where the increase was 3.5%. And that had what built in? Did it have a intent to start a reserve?
I believe at that time, when we did it in 21, the water plant was 13 million at that time. That was the estimated cost for a brand new one. And so at that time, we believed we were gonna have sufficient reserves to build a $13 million plant, but then obviously, obviously a lot happened in the next few years.
But that was not a 3.5% rate increase.
Adding to the rates, continuing to have a rate increase, let alone adding to the rate, had some element of building a reserve for future development.
Yes.
Okay, so the difference between what we are saying today and what has been historically the precedent set to start a reserve is that the reserve need is so much greater that not only can we not hold things flat, which already has an embedded increase, things compounding year over year, that we're not going down. This additional 1.5%, potentially to 5%, or additional 1% is recognizing additional reserves that we didn't expect. Fair to say?
It's amazing the things you can say when you tend to have a long tenure with the city. So if we do successfully get federal funding, And if we bring in the money we need, we'll be back here recommending a lower or zero rate increase for the years after that when that money comes in. And we intend to start looking for that grant at the end of this year, once we see how the politics is going to shake out in Washington, DC. We have to wait to see how this election turns out, because the BRICS grant is the obvious source. And I'm not being political, it's just tactics.
Derek, Duff, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So there was some discussion prior to this last item where we were talking about removing or reducing the contingency. Does that limit our ability to certain debt instruments that we're kind of discussing if we can't get any grant money or we can't get a bond, a general purpose bond? Does that put us at risk if we lower that contingency to not have availability to like low interest debt instruments as a result of having to bring a new plant online later on?
It would if we did below a certain amount, but in either model, having, I think the one projected like $9 million, we just have to usually come up with a half of a cash match. So like when we did the WIPIA loan for the water plant, when we started that process, it was a 50% cash match that we were looking to have. So obviously having more contingency helps the situation and equals less debt, but it doesn't usually prevent us from taking on debt because anybody's willing to loan to a government, basically.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody want to see any other, you want me to run any other numbers? We've got the two plans that were sent out in the packet, and then there was the other one that I just ran, which is the 4% with that basically would move those two lines down 2 million. So were there any other, but retains the staffing? Anything else, any other questions on water? And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want to take discussion on each system, or because I think my next slide goes into sewer. If you want to have any more discussion on water before we move on.
As far as the rate, I thought we were gonna do that.
Oh, sorry, I got more. Sorry, there's more. I said I'm not firing on all cylinders. Okay, let's go ahead. Right, so under the 4.5% and the 3.9%, basically, and I'm looking at the time, and so I'll try to speed up here a little bit now. We had meetings previously where we talked about how the revenue increase, that slope of percent increases, translates into a rate schedule, and that we went through that whole cost of service analysis to evaluate customer usage patterns and what costs were going up and how they aligned with the different rate components. I won't repeat all of that tonight because we're short on time and we already went through it once, though it was some months ago. But what that means is that a 4.5% overall rate increase does not translate into every single rate on the schedule going up at 4.5%. It's a combination of things. And partly why the one of the planning parameters has been to maintain the revenue recovery from the fixed components of the rate schedule. That's the meter charge and the service charge at least 33%. That's kind of the minimum recommended level for revenue stability. And so the committees of Christmases past, of a rate review past, have advocated for first increasing that fixed charge, but then maintaining that. So I've made those same assumptions here, and that's why you see that the fixed charge goes up a little bit higher percentage wise in the first year, and then goes up kind of averages out for the 4.5% over the 2 years, and the customer individual volume charge increases at the bottom part of the table that vary by customer class. They go up at varying rates based on their particular seasonal usage patterns. But overall, 4.5% rate increase is accomplished through these rates, which then on the next slide translates into a customer bill, which
A mechanical question on that previous slide.
Mhm.
You were talking about different classes going up different amounts. Why is the commercial one the lowest at only 2.7%?
It reflects the usage, in particular the seasonality, and what drives the peak seasonal use. And so that just reflective of when we look at the 5 years of history, that we kind of do a rolling 5-year evaluation of who is driving those increases in the summer that cost the city more to build capacity around, and maintenance costs. And the commercial has in this period of evaluation had lower peak use than the other classes. So you see like irrigation, not surprisingly, because that's all about use during the peak season. It goes up the highest. Industrial also had a fairly significant increase. And then commercial had more steady use. And so that's what's reflective there.
Thank you.
The next slide just shows you then typical bills, and with all of that, different percentages, single family, SF, residential, typical bill would go up just about 4.5%. And then you see, that there are some each class in the 4 to 5.5 generally range, with the industrial being a little bit higher that second year. So it's about a $2 close, probably average $2.50 between the 2 years in terms of the monthly bill increase that would result from these rate increases. And the next 2 slides then just show you the same information.
A quick comment. So on the residential one, just in particular, right? You're going from 54.50 to roughly $57, right?
Exactly.
25. An extra 0.5%, 4.5 versus 5% would be maybe an extra 25 cents.
Yeah, if you look at the next slide, that the 2 slides down, that'll show you at the 3.9%. So that'll give you, if you go one more down, so that increase is $2.21. And that you compare that to what we were saying was about 2.5. So it's about a quarter, I guess, this is a little more than a 0.5% increase, difference between the 2 scenarios.
Yeah.
So it's, it's 20 to cents or so.
0.5% is about 25 cents a month extra, an increase on top of the increase.
Yes.
For a residential customer.
You've got it. Yeah. All right. So the next slide. Oh, the bill comparison. So this shows that both the 3.9% increase and the 4.5%, you wouldn't change the position relative to these other communities. We added here the percentage. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. The box shows the percent of the bill that is the fixed versus the volume. And I think that's particularly interesting. And you'll see that by and large, most of these utilities follow my rule of, it's not just my rule, that it actually is water standard industry rate setting standard practice, that in terms of revenue stability, majority of these are 40% or 35% or more through the fixed charge, and some are significantly more than that. So I think right, the bills and the composition of the fixed versus variable are within industry practice and these other communities.
I have another question, mechanical. Here in this graph, you've got 44% fixed.
This is the bill, so which is different than the overall revenue. So this
Oh,
is just for a tip. Yeah, good question though. It's represents two different numbers. Yeah.
Several tables ago, it's at 34%.
Right, and that's the overall revenue because, larger customers, the fixed charge is the fixed charge, and large commercial customers, the fixed portion of their bill is going to be very small, and on average, 34% of the total revenue from all customers is anticipated to be come from the fixed charge. Whereas when you drill down to an individual bill, because the residential user is a smaller user, that meter and service charge represents a higher percent.
Right.
Okay, I think that was it that I had for water.
Is the plan to go through each system tonight? Touch it.
Yeah, so each system has, I think most of them, when we went through it before, it had like 2 different rates. So the idea is to land on a rate, and then that's the rate that will be presented at the next meeting at the town hall, where you guys will hear the input from the public and then give your formal recommendation to council.
And
proposal. My current proposal is that we go to a 5.0. That's what I propose. With the 4 million threshold. As far as
Yeah, I would second that. I feel like, unfortunately, I think we need to increase more than we have. In order to cover the issues that are out there. But we also need to be mindful to the people that are on the scale. What can be done to mitigate their impact? I don't know what that is.
So we're obviously very mindful about this. I've been poor myself. And it's not easy. So the one line item we've already discussed, that's becoming very concrete in our 3-year model. We can take that line item off because it's a flat rate line item. We're still going to continue to look at other possible ways to do things, to have special programs like we've already started. I was thinking actually today about, is there a way to make some of the other charges like the police support line item be a progressive tax in some way? But I haven't had a chance to scope the legality of that yet. This was an idea I had literally today. Try to think about other line items. So we have to talk to her. She is the first time she's heard this words coming out of my mouth. Can that charge be changed so that folks on the bottom of the income scale would pay less for police officer support while still gathering the total amount that we need for police? Don't know, but it's worth looking at.
Yeah, I'm gonna go around the table. It's, sorry, Derek, you're really talking?
the question, I guess, is are we going to propose, we're making motions and voting on individual components? Or are we gonna look at the whole thing holistically and then discuss and vote on the overall rate? How does this have to happen, or should it happen?
At this point, you guys are just going to decide for each utility. I think it'd be easy if we took at each utility after each presentation and said, we've heard both rate proposals, let's set on one. And then the next meeting will be the public comment, and then you'll give your official recommendation once you've heard from the public. But you want to settle on a rate tonight to present to the town hall meeting.
The final overall rate?
Yes.
Okay. Because I see where there could be some considerations give and take of the four pieces, well, I don't necessarily agree with five. I think a large capital expenditure like a water plant should be a geo bond. We haven't tried that yet. So am I gonna support a five? Personally, I won't,
We'll answer that one.
but hold on a second, please. So I'm just giving an example of where I might say, okay, I can get behind five if we can take something off the top. But the overall obligation in the final water bill rate is where I'd be more concerned about. When we go to the town hall meeting. So. We're gonna go line by line and say. Water, we're gonna vote for a rate. That's gonna be in our proposal, and then we're gonna go to the next one, wastewater. Okay.
You just did it a fact. I just wanna make sure that's a fact. You can unmute for a second.
So the rate model that we have proposed develops half of the water capacity that the city is going to need in the long term, so we can finally decommission the old plant. As well as the money that's in this model, we are still going to have to pursue other money to get to full capacity of what we need. Whether that happens at that time, because we do a successful general obligation bond, or whether we could do it through getting some additional funding from the feds, it's not the whole meal deal that's in here. So
I'm just clarifying. I heard this, say, we have not done or requested a geo bond. Is that what I heard?
I've been in Newberg for 17 years and the geo bonds never been floated across any belt I'm aware of.
if we do not get federal funding to supplement this water plant, you will be seeing one come before the voters.
So I honestly, I expect that. You spent 22 million on a pool. You know, am I gonna be surprised if they say we need 40? Honestly, we first said 20, I thought. So to hear 40, I would expect that to be a geo bond sort of approach. I don't know that long-term increases are ever gonna get there. And this is just me speaking from what I've heard through this process. To your point, that 1% increase, a 2% increase is $3 a month, it's $12, and, you know, that's not getting us any closer to X million. We're gonna get halfway there. Will is talented in a way that many aren't in finding alternative revenue options and being creative. I kind of feel like we're starting backwards, and in my personal preference, and from a fiscally responsible standpoint, I'd like to see it go to the voters for this level of capital improvement. I'm not in any space to push that, pursue that, or have that voted on. But when I hear, well, let's inch it up a little more and inch it up a little more, pushing towards a goal of we're gonna somehow fund this with utility bill, that's where I would say, I would rather leave things flat on the water side and head down the path of where I think the money's really likely to come from, either grants or geo fund.
Will we get something to say?
I will say that in the attempt to get a general obligation bond to pass, I suspect we may be more successful if we can show that we have other skin in the game coming from the rates, and therefore, even in pursuit of a general obligation bond, we're only asking for what we really think we need. But that's 2 clicks away from right now. Believe me, our engineers are already wanting to attempt the federal route first.
I would support that too, take the grant dollars for sure. But I think it's a different message to tell folks, hey, since 2015, 16, we've been ratcheting up this bill at X% to plan for this thing, and we had to add a little more this time because it's projected to be more and more and more. And then we get to the point where it's like, well, now we're 17, 18 years into this, and we want a bond to go on top of it. I get the need. The message to the people will be, that's not an easy swallow. They're already wondering why we're ratcheting up for reserve for a water plant we can't afford. And it's already been paper and everyone's talking about it, so there's no breaking news. So that conceptually I think is a tough pill to propose to swallow. Spent years ratcheting up, and even by Will's comments, it's not gonna be enough. So at the end of this endeavor, there's still gonna be a need for federal grant, geo bond, some sort of financing. So let's be mindful of what we do in terms of increases for the optics and the reality of what it's getting us, or taking us to.
So I think I'm hearing there's at least two different scenarios that are being perhaps voted on. One is the 5%. The other one is, I think, more or less the 4%, keep the heads, reduce the contingency to 2 million, and go for the geo.
Yeah, I mean, I can make a formal motion, and we have to vote on this first for parliamentary procedure reasons, but at the end of the day, my general approach to this is not, we're gonna get there with these increases at 0.5% or 3%. When that first started, it's talking 7%, I thought, well, you know, we gotta find the big bullet, 7%, okay, that's gonna maybe do something. But that was never the cards, because the number. So, I'm back to, we've got a reserve, we built a reserve, we are depleting the reserve just on general maintenance going up and other expenses. But I don't see this mechanism of rate increase getting us to the finish. So to that end, I would say, we've done 3.5 for the last 7 or 8 years. I would say 4%, things or more, maybe even get behind the 4.5. But at that point, you're just making small things in terms of the dollars. More of a philosophical approach to this whole funding issue.
And I hear exactly what you're saying. I agree. I mean, we're kind of doing this baby step approach to build up the reserve if we go with the 5 or whatever. Under the other plan, though, you're hoping to get this geo on. I don't know what are the odds that we would get it. No one would know, I guess, right? And what if we don't?
If we don't get it, then we go back to something like the Vivian loan. So there's 2 different options with the revenue bond. So the revenue bond, you either have to have a 50% cash match, or you have to pledge your future water rates. So you would have to prove that you have substantial water rate increases to supply the debt payments in the future. So usually you have to have a certain percentage built in of like a buffer. So there's a requirement of how much your rate has to go up every year when you do those types of revenue bonds.
No free lunch.
Yeah. So when we were first looking at the Whitby bond, we were trying to do the 50% cash match to avoid having to pledge future water rates.
Hence the reserve.
Yes, hence the reserve.
Okay, I think we should do 5%, but from a different angle, in that I'm concerned about wiping out seismic. We're on pins and needles. I'm concerned about having so little available in 28, 29, as we've shown on that earlier graph, that I think for those reasons, we need 5%. We know that regardless of whether it's 4, 4.5, 5, it's not going to be enough. We've got to go to supplemental funding, but I think for these other reasons, we need 5.
Chair.
Jennifer?
Below 5% just so that we have coverage for seismic improvements. All the other capital improvements that will probably come down and have a little bit more of a buffer for the 28, 29 period. Deb, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to correct for the record that the last 2-year rate increases for water were 4%. And the committee 2 years ago, when looking at the potential financing for the plant, wanted to have it at 4% as opposed to 3.5% because they wanted to have more cash to fund the plant. So just wanted to clarify that.
We're playing the different amount here. There you go. That is countering what you stated. We have not played the game of we're going to increase and stuff. It was a small increase for the plan. And when we reviewed the data for the plant, it was a 10 million piece, not a $40 million.
Right.
3.5 and 4% is what Doug was trying to reiterate as far as it is. We haven't been trying to catch it. We had a great chance of catching it with a 3.5 to 4% for a $10 million plant.
Exactly.
I just want to correct that.
Okay, but it did
Yep.
go 3.5 to 4.
Yeah,
Right, and,
For the $10 million plan, I think that's what you just said.
but,
Okay, that increase is earmarked. Yes or no? I guess that's a yes or no question.
yeah,
Do we have a $10 million plan?
We wish.
yeah.
Where's
We
that?
wish we was thinking $1.5
Yeah.
million funds.
wait a minute. What's the question?
I don't have a question.
Okay,
The idea that we've been adding to a reserve for future capital improvements has been talked about throughout this whole process. So I don't think we need to be, it shouldn't be lost on us that in years past, this has been something that's been addressed in this committee. You've been adding, you've been adding, you've been adding. Okay,
Now we're at a point where we don't have. And there isn't a plan in place that's gonna get it all done. You know, this piece, concept going, which I'm very thankful that you've been that creative approach. I'm just stating what the optics are. We've been adding, it's not huge amounts, but compounded over time, the number of times it's happened, it's enough. And to see our total water bills from 170, 180, even the little numbers start to matter, and that's where folks are really saying what was on here. So they think whether we've got plans to build a big plan. We don't. So keep saying we want to increase for the big plan to have final terms. We'll have a conversation.
So under the proposed plan, we will be able to build sufficient capacity to keep up with demand. I want to be clear about that. That's a concrete plan. So in other words, looking at the sort of costs that we're seeing right now, projected forward to the end of the 7-8 years, we're going to be able to build extra capacity. Now, I can't tell you whether that's A plus B immediately, or that's A and B has to wait for a while longer. That's where the general obligation bond, fallback, or preferably a federal grant comes in. But we must build some extra capacity at the end of this cycle, because otherwise there's going to be hose pipe bans and other measures in June, July, August that will hit us all. So something's going to get built, or over my dead body would, right? But it might have to be, and engineering has already clarified this for me. If all else goes wrong, can we build an extensible plan that only has 6 filter beds, and then we have to work on raising the money for the next 6 to then shut down the old plan? That is an engineering reality. It's not the cost-effective way to build a plant. The cost-effective way to build a plant is do it all at once. Because you have to blow out the walls and change the pipes to build the next 6 filters. So, but that is a plan, mate, and we're going to make that happen because we don't have a choice. We're mandated to make water.
That plan as presented today is at 4.5%.
It's in both models that came forward, but one had slashing staff built in it to get the rate more.
So is it fair to say that 5 would be adding extra to contingencies? It was an extra 2 million, I think is what it is. Okay, so I don't have any questions. I can vote on whatever you want to questions. Well, last time for Derek online, any input?
Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing is at 4.5%, you still have to cut back on a fair amount of the work in terms of seismic upgrades, which concerns me. Even at those levels, I think we're all in agreement that we certainly don't want to have to look at staff layoffs and reduction of potential quality of our water systems. So I think for most of us that's off the table. But my concern is from a long-term perspective. We do have a forecast that doesn't necessarily allocate much for what could potentially be some regulatory requirements in the future, leaving us to have this discussion in a few years where maybe we're not talking about 5%, but we're looking more at like 8 or 10%. So I generally would side um, on the being a little bit more conservative on getting a little bit higher rate earlier on, rather than having to go down this road again in a couple of years. So I'm generally leaning towards a 5% increase just to make sure that we can try to reach all of our covenants specific to the seismic requirements. Because I mean, we can make those repairs now, or we can make them when a potential event happens, and that becomes a much more costly endeavor. So that's just generally where I'm sitting at on this.
That motion for a water bill for Newberg next cycle to do a 5% with $4 million contingency. Basically, the 4.5 would actually go up to 5%. And we'll go around. Thomas, sorry, second motion. Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. And you're gonna like?
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
They capture it? I think they're making a motion, second, call for vote. I guess that's okay. Did we do it wrong?
Well, no, this is fine. This is just an informal, recommendation for the rates, but, we also didn't hear anything from Counselor Gilbert.
Oh.
I don't know, I know she said she was on it, was gonna be consistent, so I don't know if she had any input or wants to take it.
And that was including the seismic upgrades back in at 5%, is that correct?
Yes.
Not technically, but, it was part of the original plan that we were looking to push out.
Unknown.
It was in the original 5%
Strong suggestion.
capital, yeah.
It seemed to be the common concern is those projects that were being carved out. I get it, but.
It means the ductile pipe replacement fee scheduled for next FY to go back to 300 on the
Rather than if that's what you spent the extra half percent. Yeah, we will.
Ready to move on? Okay, wastewater is hopefully will be shorter. This is just a recap. There's no new information there. Significant wastewater treatment plant improvements in the 6 to 8 year period, although there's some uncertainty around the timing and the solutions for this. So we had brought to you before a 3.5% and a 4.5 or 4%. The prior plan, meaning the last rate review cycle, had recommended 3.5% increases. That was before inflation really kind of went crazy. So some consideration of an additional inflationary increase in the 4% because the improvements, if you'll go to the next slide, there is, ooh, it's black. That big black bar out there in the beyond, in the great beyond. So this is one that there's not a lot of specificity at this point in time, but there is some need for or anticipated need with respect to the oxidation ditches, some specific improvements at the plant, which are likely to be costly. So the the 3.5%, if you go to the next slide, would, well, this is at 4%. So the 4% was, that scenario was run in order to generate projected capital that would better align with the average CIP funding needs, as shown in the blue line, which are anticipated to grow over the planning period. The 3.5%, if you go to the next slide. Oh, I didn't show the 3.5%. It's lower than the 4%. It wouldn't quite meet those funding needs. So again, nothing changed from what we already presented to you. We're presenting the same two option, and just by way of reminder, the wastewater rates are shown here, also vary by customer class, a fixed and a volume charge. And if the next slide shows the bill impacts.
Mechanical question again.
Yeah.
The top two rows, it's 124, 25, is there a reason why the numbers go down slightly?
Yeah, that's the cost of service. So right now we're sitting at about 36% revenue recovery from the fixed charge, and you know, the rate components, again, the way when run the other model, which is distributing the cost to the revenue components, rate components, those costs just didn't go up quite as much, and we were already sitting at the, you know, acceptable revenue recovery. And so those decline slightly. We could also just say, let's hold those. You know, I could do when I bring back the rate for the town hall, we could also just sort of have those stay at the current levels rather than going down. That's an option too. It's a minor adjustment. The next slide shows the bill impacts. And so here you can see that a 4% on the sewer bill results in about the $2.24 increase in the first year. And then on that, for the single family user, it's a bit higher in the second year. More of the first year rate increase is picked up by the commercial. So it's kind of the reverse of water, the higher strength users, because more of it's related to plant work and higher strength wastewater. So residential actually gets a little bit of a break in the form of a slightly smaller rate increase and bill impact in the first year. So the average between those 2 years is maybe, you know, $275 or something per month on the bill. The other option is the 3.5%, which is in the next slide. So there you see those rates. And if you want to look at the bill on the next page, so that's a significant, you know, less than a $2 increase in the first year for the single family, and then $272 in the second year. I didn't have anything else. Will, I don't know if you want to add anything there on, since you're now a part of the engineering team, or if Paul had anything from the engineering perspective or the city leadership perspective, if there's anything you want to add on wastewater.
I would add that I think we should go with 3.5 on this one, because I'm trying to think about people who are struggling. This is not an area where we have an immediate near-term crisis. There's also some other factors to think about. Once we finish paying off the communication tower debt early, we're going to move on to the wastewater plant and seek to retire that early. A large part of our costs here are built on the wastewater processing plant debt that we've been carrying for many years. So staff feels a lot more confident in this area. And clearly our bigger issue is the water, not the wastewater. So I think we can make this work.
I agree for another reason, and that is the wastewater is the largest component of the entire water bill. So with a smaller increase, it won't be as dramatic to customers as the larger increase. It's already a bigger portion. Do that.
And you could advance the slide too.
Deb, did you say advance the slide?
Yeah, I forgot there was the comparison too. This is the one that is higher relative to positioning, ranking with the other communities. So yeah, any less increase, most importantly, impacts the pocketbook less, and also kind of the relative comparison.
I think I heard a mutter, I was gonna ask the question, why it's so high relative to the others due to debt? Is that the issue?
Yeah, we took out wastewater debt, I think in 2011, and that's a huge chunk of what that's paying off.
The other thing that I always have to point out on wastewater is that many of the comparative communities are served by regional systems. And so there are the economies of scale associated with that. When you look at Carleton, Dundee, other smaller towns that are operating their own plants, you're not out of line with those communities. Lots on here, and we did add other cities because it had been very focused on regional systems, Sherwood and North Plains, Tualatin, Tigard, Forest Grove. Those are all Cornelius even are served by Clean Water Services. So while some of those have a local wastewater component, they are benefiting from the fact that the treatment works are all spread over lots of people. And so it does keep those rates lower.
Seems like both of those comments want the prior debt that was taken on in 2011, as well as the differences versus the other nearby cities would be nice bullet points at the bottom of this slide. I don't know if it's kind of in the town hall, but
yes,
that would be very helpful.
The time North Plains is sewage gets to Clean Water Services happening as a battery already.
That's all I had on wastewater. Did you do your little poll on recommendation there?
Motion, like 2.5 for wastewater.
Second. I would agree as well, based on, as Will said, that this is a lower risk versus the water, which is much more important. So therefore, and I think also to Ned's point, if we go with the 3.5 year, it kind of helps with the other increase we were talking about on the water side. So it's got a higher base, because so actually probably negates the whole darn thing and then some. So, would agree.
That was Ned. Jennifer?
I agree, 3.5.
Ron? Agree. There. Yay. And Derek online?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement as well. There's no imminent risk there, so I think 3.5% is an adequate percentage increase.
Then next system.
Okay. I think we're up transportation next. Here we do have some additional information courtesy of Paul and Lance. So let me just give the quick recap and then I'll let Paul talk about the great information that he put together. So we talked about at the previous meeting that the gas tax revenues have been declining per capita and creating a structural imbalance in the street fund, which in the simple terms mean expenses are greater than revenues. And so there are claims on that gas tax revenue that does not include street preservation, which is why the TUF was created to specifically apply to street preservation projects. The part of the problem is that the TUF rates did not increase initially, and when it did increase, it has not. So it's been losing ground in terms of purchase power. So the full adjustment, if you go to the next slide, based on the information that Lance had put together for the prior meeting, at the bottom it shows about a 31% increase would have, given the inflationary changes from when the TUF was first implemented in 2016, 2017, the full inflationary impact has been 31% or so. And if we're projecting forward to the next year, the cumulative would be about 34%. So I think the committee had asked, if you go to the next slide, well, beyond just understanding that inflation is a concern, what other information could be used to inform this discussion around what increase is needed, and specifically, has the pavement condition been improving or not? And Paul is here to answer that question.
Based on the meeting in December, staff was asked on the payment condition index, whether it's getting better or the same or losing ground. Here's this chart here. As we look into the data that has been provided and assisted by consultants, we have the 2014 versus the 2020, and we have also city staff projected the DCI for the 2024 this year here, which is sort of in blue color. As you can see that we look into 4 different categories: the minor arterial, such as Mountain View Drive. That one basically is one example of the minor arterial. Major collectors, kind of like Data Road, LA Road, and Hamlet. And River Street, I believe, is also a major collector. That one there. You can see that it's declining from 79 in 2014 to 78 in 2020, and we project it to be about 75 based on the funding and things like that we have. One of the reasons it is declining because we have much less purchasing power. Like for the first 3 years, based on the data in 2017, 18, and 19, we have 0 rate change, and that hurts our effort. Usually, we have some increase at least to follow the inflationary rate, but at least help hold the ground. Just thinking about it. For the minor collector, we also see a decline, 88 to 75 and 71 in 2024. For the residential, we are losing quite a bit of ground as well. And a lot of streets in the downtown area are very much residential on the south side. So the overall sort of looking at all these different classification. 2014, we have the 73 PCI. 20, we are dropping to 70. this year, the projection would be 68. So, the payment condition, we are, is uphill battle for this, for the city. So, on the right side, that's the good is pretty much from 70 to 100, there is about 55 to 70. And poor is anything less than 55. So that would be this slide. If I may go to the next slide. We have generated a map based on the projected PCI in 2024. As you can see, a lot of red colored streets. They are pretty much in the downtown area. So on our side of it and further south. And one thing I want to mention is that for streets that are in anything less than 55, a lot of preservation effort, the cost goes up tremendously to a point that we may have to remove the road, excavate it, and rebuild the base. And that's why it's very expensive. And it's more expensive than building from nothing because we have to dig out the old one, it costs money. And then we have to rebuild it. And there are two ways. Usually we use the conventional aggregate and build up the heavier subbase on that one there. And then the slightly cheaper way would be to use the cement treated base, meaning we tilt the rock and some of the clay or soil material and then add the cement powder based on geotechnical analysis. We can figure out the cement may have to be about 6 or 7 or 8% content relatively to it that has to be mixed in there. And usually it would take about, sorry for the development, it would take probably about a week for it to settle a bit before we do the paving work over it. And usually the restriction would be has to be done in the drier weather. Wet weather it would be challenging. So as you see in this map here, we have a lot of green colored streets pretty much in the north and the east and things like that. And those areas that will need to keep an eye and to crack and surface here, we just maintain it so that it doesn't deteriorate to a point of beyond repair, I guess that's what that would. So the red is the one that will be very expensive, and then we can look at the next slide. So if you have questions, feel free to stop me.
Sidewalks.
Sidewalk for which one? Depending on the, let's put it this way, for crack and surface seal, we are not required to do any work on the sidewalk. For anything that is more aggressive than that, for instance, if we remove a layer of the pavement and then build it back in there, then by the state and federal requirement, I guess, we'll need to take care of the ADA ramps. So, and then obviously to rebuild the entire street, the ADA ramps is something that we cannot avoid. So it has to be done, and those are pretty expensive, each one of them. This slide here shows some of the future examples of the pavement preservation. For instance, McDonald Drive, if we just do the crack and surface sealing, the estimated cost is somewhere, and there's a quantity there, about 1,580 feet by 32 feet that we have a cost associated with it, and the estimated cost for doing that is about $45,000. And if you want to know the unit cost, you just do a reverse calculation, you'll come up with that one there. The next slide is for the River Street. River Street is the major collector, as you know, is the great street that goes to the boat ramp. In summertime, there are a lot of folks from Newberg and from outside of Newberg travel greatly on that road. So it's not just the local traffic. So that's, but city street will just have to in public street, we just have to open up and serve folks from outside of Newberg as well. And that one there, we're looking into, this is not a total fix, but we're just looking into, say, do a 2-inch grind. The machine will mill off 2 inches of asphalt and then put back the 2-inch in there, pretty much from the 4th Street to the 12th Street. Last year, we have done House Bill 2001 water line and within the 12-inch line, so we restore the trench, but anything outside of it is still in pretty bad shape. And a lot of people call me for the city, everybody complaining about it. So eventually, this street should be rebuilt because it's a major collector to have fire lanes and sidewalk and street trees, all this stuff. But this would, if we are going to do that, we'll need to make sure that all the homeowners are involved with some kind of a process in it. But that would probably be 5 or 10 years down the road at least. But we cannot wait for that time and not do anything. So this suggestion to have a 2-inch grind and overlay, that is to keep it in a decent shape, and it's for 5 to 10 years before we hit the point we have to do something. And the estimated cost is about $360,000. One thing I want to mention is River Street, the highway, and there are parts of it underneath are actually concrete. So in some areas, hopefully we're not hitting those when we put the 2-inch grind and overlay, because if you hit the concrete, then it would be really expensive as well. Safe to not assume that at this point in time. The next street that we're looking into is Willamette Street. That one is in very terrible shape. And it's probably just a little bit better than gravel road. Exaggerate a little bit, my exaggeration is probably not too far from the truth. And we have to reconstruct it, and we are assuming a cement treated base from 5th to 11th. Cement treated base is somewhat less expensive than the conventional rock aggregate. So the cost for doing that is also $1 million. As you can see, the dollars involved is so much spread out and so drastic. So, and all this thing, we have a note here saying all this payment location needs to be determined after we perform payment geotechnical investigation and also look into the utility conflict clearances and also the available and the final budget determination. Let's see. Should I pass it on to that? You want to do the next slide or? Yeah, if you will, please. If you
Sure.
have questions, feel free to ask. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So there were the prior option that we had developed and consistent with the prior plan was to continue the 4% rate increase, which doesn't, hopefully will be consistent with future inflation, but would not make a dent in the sort of lost purchasing power. And you can see what the rate schedule here for the standard classes of customers, the single unit, currently 562, and that would increase. These 4% increases have a much smaller impact because we're dealing with much smaller rates, so less than a quarter increase. Now, the next slide shows the full inflation adjusted, which I rounded the single unit rate to 750 to include that roughly, 33% lost revenue. There are lots of options in between, right? I mean, from 4 to 34% increase. The committee really hadn't had much discussion about this other than the request of Paul to sort of say, well, where are we with what has been done and the funding levels today and the projects that the city is able to accomplish, which you heard from Paul. So, without any more feedback or specific direction from the committee about other options you wanted to see, we just came back with kind of the stay the course and continue the degradation of the pavement condition, or take a larger jump, which you can see here that under the fully inflated, that the increase for the bill for a single unit would be about $1.88 to get up to that level, going from 562 to 750 in one fell swoop. And then the anticipated sort of inflationary increase after that. And some communities, will tie the TUF to a particular inflation index. If it is at a level that is consistent with the maintenance needs, which yours is not currently, and then just have kind of an inflationary adjustment. So you're at a situation where the current fee is not adequate to maintain pavement. They can do a project here and there, but it's certainly not at a position to help with preventing that degradation of the pavement condition. So let's go to the next slide. I think that just shows you the comparison. You're on the low end of those who charge these fees. You are at the very lowest end, and even the fully inflated, you would be south of kind of the midline, but it would be a large increase in one increase. So this one I kind of toss back to the committee for discussion, and if you would like to see another option brought forward to I've got my computer here, I can run other options now, or bring you a different scenario for the town hall.
On record.
Oh, just get back to Steve. Just using my handheld computer here now, my cell phone. If we had indexed the 4.99 original 4% each year, I get to a proposed rate for 24 of 6.5, maybe 660. And you just don't check that. How you would see it also.
Do you want to go back a few slides to that table that Lance had put together? Keep going. Sorry, one more. Or actually, no, it was before Paul's slides. You got to go back several.
Slide 28.
Thanks.
There you go, right there. So this was based on Lance's numbers. So what did you say again, that you had applied, that you had?
The original TUF fee if we had increased it each year starting in 17.4%. I show that as what would be a 17% this year, but would get us to 6.5, normalizing a 4% increase over that same time frame.
Okay, I guess I'm not quite following. So working from the 5, you're working from the starting at the 499 and applying the inflationary increases, or are you starting from 562?
Starting at 499 and increasing at 4% per year.
Oh, 4% per year.
Starting at 17, rounding it forward.
Okay, so what I think was done here is looking at the inflationary increases as measured by the ENR inflation rate and saying what would be needed to sort of recapture that lost inflation. So the delta between the ENR at 10726 in 2017 and then going to the 15,332, which I think that's the basis for the 31% adjustment, and then comparing.
Given a
No,
different
sorry.
scenario.
A different scenario.
Yeah, if you just increase by 4% every single year.
Yes, gotcha.
2% inflation adjustment, all that kind of stuff. And what do you say, 631 or something?
I got 657.
6, yeah.
That's another option. Yeah.
It's gonna be somewhere in between.
Yes.
Well, go back to
Yes.
the narrative. We're gonna have a town hall meeting to discuss this. That's a complicated formula to put in front of someone and then say you're increasing 33%. That's.
Yes.
that's horrible. So to that end, if we say, well, we didn't index it from origination, and if we trend it like we do the other components, somewhere at 3.5 or 4%, then it would be today 6.57, 660. And you still have to present a 17% increase, but you've got a reason that's like a one liner.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Easier to understand.
Mm-hmm.
We should have done that.
And the narrative. Yeah. So,
Andy, I got a question for you, and then that'll base my opinion after that. So when we're all done and agree on all these increases, et cetera, it gets posted, right? Broadcast.
Yes, so then I'll do a public notice on that.
Right. In your notice, do you put just the dollar values that they're going up to, or do you also publish the percentage increase?
I do both.
Okay.
Yes.
Reason I ask that is because someone's gonna say, this is going at 17%?
or
Yeah, okay, and so I'm wondering if we need to, dial it down, something like you said, that they can rationally understand, as opposed to 31%, even though you're starting off with such a relatively small dollar value. When it's going up that large a percent, if people just look at percentage increases, that's still gonna jump out at them.
we may field other questions about the newly established urban renewal district and how it's gonna contribute to road improvements. The map you showed, I see some roads that fall into the district. I don't know if they're gonna have to pick up part of the dollar to improve sidewalks in Blight. So some of the cost estimates may be shared. But we don't have control over that today. This is something different. It could be a comment that comes up. Wait a minute, we just passed an urban renewal to fix all the roads. And that's honestly, it's a lot of folks in a very simple approach think that's what it's about. Better sidewalks, lighting, and streets. So take that and then say, well, now we're increasing the tough rate. Some number. The optics are tough and the message is gonna happen there.
One possible approach might be to just talk about the dollar increase in each of the individual line items. And just show the percentage only for the total change. Does that make sense? So each individual item, goes up $2 here, up $1 here, up $2 here. And then, show what the total is gonna go up by, I don't know, $10 or something, but the percentage is only gonna be like 4% in total. And then you get away from this percentage in the individual line item.
So really, one of the reasons why we got ourselves into this situation is, as absolutely what Derek just said, why did we do that in those early years and lost that compounding effect of the advantage That was stupid. The second thing is state revenue coming from gasoline. There are academic papers that I have read as part of my current degree where that was predicted in 2009 and 2010, and nobody took the appropriate action to begin to head off the state revenue share from gasoline tax, which could have been used to help with this problem. They could have started, they could have thought way before now. Oh, now they're realizing it. They're talking about putting tolls here and there and doing other things. It's a day late and a dollar short. And as usual, it's the municipalities that have to somehow fill in the delta on the gap. And that's something you can tell the people because it's true.
Any other comments? There.
Yeah, so
Your proposal as a motion for vote.
Sure, I would make a motion to vote on, or to increase the up rate by 17% this year, or something to the equivalent of $6.60.
Was it, did you say 660? Is that what it was?
Yeah, we're gonna round up to that.
Okay, got it.
Purpose, either purpose.
And what's the, are we doing that both years? Because this is a 2-year process. So 17% each year? Or just 1 year?
That would be 1 year to capture the shortcomings of lack of indexing, and then the following year at 4%.
Got it. Thank you.
4 or 4.5? I thought you did 4.5 to catch up.
I used 4, or
Okay.
our last 2 years, we had 4 looked like, so it's
Perfect. That will help a lot. I second. Thomas.
Yep, I would agree completely.
Ned.
Agree.
Jennifer.
I like the numbers, agreed.
Ron, agreed. Agreed. Derek online.
yeah, I'm good with this, but I would like to, I know when it's not appropriate for this group, but I would like to, just to put the idea in Will's head about potentially looking at a local gas tax to help fill some of the gap as well. I don't know if we've explored that, but yes, I'm good with these rates as is.
Probably encourage you to talk to your local city council.
Oh, I will.
in
I'll
control.
go talk to Robin.
And I encourage you to do it strongly.
I will. I'll go talk to Robin. I'll go. She's, I'll approach her at her house because that seems like a really good place to do that. I'm joking. I'll have it in session.
Yeah, next one.
Okay, last but not least, stormwater. Again, no new information here. Let's, I think we need to go, yeah. We had been looking at 2 options, a 6.5 and a 5 and a 7.5. 6.5 was the prior plan. And the 7.5 would just better align with some of the projected capital needs. But I will say here that Lance had indicated that there is a stormwater master plan that will better identify what those capital needs are. So we're in a little bit of a situation like wastewater, I think, where there's not exactly the specificity that we have for like the water system. So advance slide, and this just shows the current plan compared to the prior plan, but the prior plan was 2 years ago. There are some potential large projects in this plan, although understand the scale of this is way different than it was for wastewater and water. We're looking at fractions of millions of dollars, not tens of millions. And go on to the next slide. So this forecast is just, again, looking at staying above the minimum balance, but also considering getting to the ability to fund a sustainable level of capital from the current rate, from the annual revenue generated by the rates. So that's the 7.5 forecast, and then the next slide shows the 6.5, which still is above the minimum target line. So is certainly from a financial integrity standpoint, a workable solution. The rate impacts, I think, are shown on the next slide. You've got the 7.5, where you're again looking at about $1.25. And the next slide shows the 6.5, so just over $1. And then I think we've got a rate comparison. Yeah, and the same situation here with these cities, Clean Water Services, the big regional utility also has stormwater. So more than half of these cities are Clean Water Services agencies, and the exceptions being Portland, Lake Oswego. I don't know, Sherwood, just Katie, maybe you know, and they must have I think they've got a higher local charge because they're part of Clean Water Services, but also have their own charge in addition. So you're right, with these increases, either one would not change your position and right within the surrounding communities.
What was last year?
6.5%.
Any discussion?
It's similar to waste. Oh, I was just going to say, similar to wastewater, I'm kind of inclined to sit with the 6.5% as a steady state, just because we don't have any imminent projects that seem to put us at risk like we did with water. So
I agree, that's why I'll make a motion to adopt the 6.5% for going forward. Second. Mr. Thomas.
I guess the only maybe wrinkle, I think I'd be okay with that, but I'd also like to take a look next at the total bill. Given the changes we discussed, water to 5, sewer to 3.5, the top maybe 33 to 17. And you know, what would storm need, I guess in my head, what does storm need to be to make the percentage increase in 2025 roughly equal in total what the prior plan percentage was? I don't know if that's 6.5, I don't know if it's 7. Does that make sense? I don't know if the prior plan, right now you're showing 5.1% on slide 46. Your 2025 increase. If the prior plan, let's say, was 4.5, and we fix those other numbers like we've already recommended, what would storm need to be to make it come out the same as the prior plan?
So I haven't worked those numbers, I think, initially.
Okay.
With what we proposed in the other three, and storm now at 6.5,
Yep.
our annual increase would be 4.41%.
Okay, 4.4, and then what was the prior plan? Or just say
The overall prior, I'm not sure.
The aggregate number for the prior, I don't know.
I can find that. I can go back to the town hall presentation from 2022 and see what that was. I think we would have shown a total bill. There it is. So that total bill, combined bill impact of a 4% water, 3.5% sewer, sorry, I forgot. The storm was actually 7.5%, I think. Looks like on this slide. 4% tough. That was a percentage increase of 4.1% the first year and 4.2% the second year. You're looking for percentages, right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, so 4.1 to 4.2.
So it sounds like a 4.4, a little bit higher than the old 4.1. And that assumes a 6.5 worth.
Right.
Okay,
And 17 for
yeah,
the street one.
for the top, yeah. Okay, then I'm okay with the 6.5. Yeah. Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed? Sure.
Yeah.
Sir Caroline?
yep, I'm in agreement.
And then we also might have the $2 or whatever it is reduction coming for the other side.
Yes, if we
Which
get,
is not
if we-
on here, but
Correct.
it should be.
when we get the communications tower debt paid off early, we will remove that line item from the bill in its entirety. It's projected that will happen in 3 years and not 5, based upon putting money aside, and if a couple of our new revenue sources prove to be better than we think, one in particular, then we will be able to do that reduction quickly. Then we will move on to the next debt, which is the wastewater debt, which we'll try to get that retired early. And if we can get that retired early, the rates might go actually go down that year. And then I'll retire as a man of order.
No, you know what?
We'll see, what happens.
Deb, is that it?
That's all I've got. Derek, thanks for the rationale for the 17.5% on the tough. That was great work on the fly there. You're hired.
Any more rate review discussion? Public comment?
None received.
I move to adjourn.
So there's not a meeting next week, right?
No, so I think
Okay.
we had a February 7th meeting scheduled, which I don't think we need. So the next meeting will be the public hearing for the town hall meeting, where we'll represent the finalized rates, and then the committee will take a vote as to make a formal recommendation to city council.
What day is that?
Oh, that meeting is on February 28th.
Will the presentation going to city council be available for us to see?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, we always publish the packets a week before.
we publish it to us, so I mean, not on the website,
Oh, I see.
but I mean, or just let us know that it's posted somewhere.
Sure, I can send out to the committee that it's published. Yeah, there'll be an informational session only to the city council on March 5th. And then the public hearing for their official vote on the rates will be on March 18th.